Hello and welcome everyone to Great Ed Live. I am so excited to be going live today, a week before our Great Ed 13th annual luncheon at Denver Botanic Gardens. Today I am excited because I'm going to be able to bring to the screen a celebrated guest from Colorado Education Association, an educator in the field doing the work, making the academic environment welcoming for all students, none other than Miss Kathy Gustad. Thank you so much, Gustad. It was important, right, for me to try and get her name right, as I would do as an educator, try and make sure that you learn that students you're working with name and correct pronunciation. And so thank you for working with me.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You know what? CEA being able to amplify your work is just a truly and really impressive. They have brought your name to us and indicated that you are doing the work to create welcoming environments for the students you're working with. And I would love to learn a little bit more about you and the work you're doing. Would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and how you got into teaching?
So my name's Kathy Gustad, and I teach at Brighton High School in Brighton, Colorado. I've been teaching for 18 years. I student taught at Brighton High School, fell in love with the school and the community, and then was hired there right after my student teaching. Really excited because that was the decision that we made to move to the 27J community. So my children also attended Brighton 27 schools all the way from preschool to graduation, and they both since graduated high school from Brighton High School, as a matter of fact. I graduated college, and I'd been married. I'd been married a year, graduated college, and wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. We knew that we wanted to start a family, so it was either grad school or have a baby, and we opted to go ahead and have a baby. So for the first 6 years after I graduated college, I was actually a stay-at-home mom. I have two beautiful, amazing sons. And then I was working part-time. Actually, ironically, kind of strangely enough, I was actually a part-time stockbroker, but I hated it. I didn't like it. I did it just to pay my student loan, and just to kind of get through it. Allowed me a lot of flexibility to be a stay-at-home mom. And one day I came home and I was just miserable. And my husband said, "Sweetie, why don't you quit your job, go back to school, get your master's in education, because we both know you're meant to be a teacher." And the next day I quit my job. I looked into programs and I started my master's program like a month later, and I kind of accelerated that a little bit. And then less than a year and a half later, I was student teaching at Brighton High School. And I haven't yet to look back. I've loved every single minute of it. You have the good days and the bad days. And I tell myself over and over again that a bad minute and a bad day, it just reminds you of all the good days. So that we have to have the bad days to remind us of the good. And I love what I do. And I'm supported by a wonderful husband and two wonderful sons who see this as my passion and my dream. And I continue to grow and learn. I learn from my students every day. I look at each of them and I know that there is goodness in them. And I tell them over and over again, I wish they could see themselves the way I see them, because if they could see themselves the way I see them, they would never doubt themselves for a second. So yeah, started at Brighton High School, just an honor and privilege to student teach there and then be hired there. And I've been there ever since. I teach, right now I teach AP Literature and Composition. I teach an accelerated 9-10 freshman class. It gives 2 years of honors pre-AP English in 1 year. And then I also teach newspaper and media, which I love.
And a really great time to be teaching that, huh?
Yes, it really is. I tell my students I'm there to make sure that they don't break the law, understanding that they have a First Amendment right and they have a right to speak and a right to be heard, is such a powerful thing for them to learn. And when they walk into my classroom, most of them don't know it.
Right.
When they leave my classroom and they stay, typically I have kids for 4 years. They start as freshmen and then grow into the program, become editors, and they run it. They do brilliant work and they really amplify their own voices and the voices of others who don't think they have a voice.
When you can create a space like that, it just is really impactful for this youth that you're working with. And I think other folks take notice, like, oh, well, she can do it in this space. How, might want some tips on how they take it to their classroom. In fact, reading from the amazing words from CEA, they did mention that you're part of the Equity Council
And
there. What has been your experience as an educator upholding that space?
so so I started. Okay, so I'm a woman of color. My mother's Filipino. I'm a first generation American, and it's always been something that's very important to me for students to see themselves in their teachers. My own and Brighton's a very diverse community, but my own children didn't have a teacher of color. My oldest was in high school, and his first teacher of color was yours truly, and my youngest, his first teacher of color was in eighth grade. Um, and that's really startling for me, right? As a woman of color, who I teach my children to be proud of who they are and their background and their heritage, and to see so many of our students who don't see themselves in their educators and the people in the classrooms and in the schools. So from the start, equity was a passion. I just didn't know how really to amplify that. Not even as a new teacher, even as an experienced teacher, my students always knew that I was there for them and I have their back and I will support them and I will step in front of whatever comes their way. I will fight for them as needed. But it wasn't actually until my son was a junior in high school that there were a couple issues that happened, and it wasn't even my son who brought it forward. It was actually other students who came forward. We had a rather controversial prom theme, and I wasn't there when the prom theme was announced, but I had several students come to my classroom after it was announced and said they were very concerned. And these students happened to be of Asian descent, and they said that they felt very uncomfortable with the prom theme. And the prom theme was an Asian prom theme, and we had done an Asian prom theme. Sorry, I have a big dog. We
Well,
haven't.
he got angry.
Yeah,
Don't even bring that back up.
Yeah. So, and they just said they felt uncomfortable with it. It had been done years past, and no one vocalized an issue with it. I had since talked to several students who are part of that prom, and they had said that they did feel uncomfortable, but just didn't feel strong enough or feel like they haven't had an advocate. So in 2016, these students came to me and said, "Will you support us and will you help us?" It's also important to note that these weren't my students. I did not know these students. They hadn't walked into my classroom. I teach AP Lit. They were going to be in my class the next year. So my interaction with these students was really very limited. And I told them, I said, well, understand that my son's a junior and this impacts him. So I do need to go home and have a conversation with him because I really care very deeply, but I want to make sure that he's comfortable with it. Because having a mom with a big voice in the high school that you're attending is not always the easiest thing. So I went home and talked to my son, and he had expressed to me that he had also felt uncomfortable about the things that were said during the assembly, not by the people who were putting that on. And that's really important to note. It wasn't the people who were creating this prom theme. It was the reaction from his classmates and the crowd. They kind of took it upon themselves. You know, when you open the door to a little bit of racism, the door kind of people just storm through. And he told me, he was very sweet. He said, you know, Mom, they need someone to fight for them. And I would never, ever deny them that. He's like, I've had you my whole life to fight for me. So I wouldn't deny anyone that. He said, I don't want to be a part of it, but I absolutely support you in being a part of it. So got in touch with those kids the next day, and we started our journey. Really trying to educate people. Met with the principal, said understand that some of the things that are happening here, like a culture is not a party, and yes, and also Asia, big continent, lots of diverse cultures. The students that I was working with, one of them was Hmong, one of them was Vietnamese. A couple of them were Pacific Islanders. So lots of different cultures, lots of different nuances. It was a very rough couple of months for me personally, because people were mad that I was speaking out against this and mad that I was supporting the kids. I approached my principal about starting a No Place for Hate because I really felt like this was an opportunity to start educating students about different cultures, about not just, you know, like it's that teaching tolerance. I didn't want people just to tolerate different cultures. I want them to accept and embrace and learn from. Like, we can all learn from each other. And so, as rough as it was, my principal said no. He said, I don't think we need it. I think we're fine. we continued, the students and they formed a little coalition, and they said, well, fine, if he's not going to let us do No Place for Hate School, then let's just meet on a bi-weekly basis and just have conversations around race and culture. And it was such a cool experience because so many different kids came. We had kids from all different backgrounds. We had some white students who wanted to be allies. We had LGBTQ students who also felt marginalized. And then we had the Asian students and our Latin students. Just, it was a really cool community. So eventually we got a new principal, and the first thing that principal did when she was hired in March was say, Kathy, let's do it. Let's start a No Place for Hate. And so I was fortunate enough to start the coalition at No Place for Hate Brighton High School. I've since passed that on to a younger teacher we encourage younger teachers to take up the mantle. And so she was very excited to take that up. So after 4 years of doing No Place for Hate, I passed that on to her, and she's doing great things with it. And we're doing really cool things. That actually started my journey with Brighton Education Association and their Equity Council. So I started on Brighton Education's Equity Council and started that. That one's a little tougher because getting teachers on their off time is hard, as you well know, trying to get in touch with teachers. And that actually led to my journey to Colorado Education Association as their equity chair. And the work that we do as a committee and as a CEA organization is really cool. We, in March, actually April, we had a roundtable with students of color and educators of color and people in the community talking about what does it mean, what does equity mean today in education, and what is it going to look like in the future. The two students who participated were seniors in high school, both students of color getting ready to go to CU, and really had strong feelings and were wondering, like, what does equity in education look like for them in the future? And then we were able to talk to some community activists and other teachers. So really, I've said this before. I say it to my students, like, the education system was not built on equity. And so we can't change policy. We have to change culture. We can talk policy and we can have all sorts of workshops, and they're great and they're wonderful, but we have to change the culture around equity so that people don't say, oh, you're a DEI hire, which is a horrible phrase and nuts.
Look, I was going to jump in and even ask you. And first, thank you for being that space for students and giving space for your own child, because I have wondered, how do you do that at the same school? Like, you hit on all the questions I was going to ask that came to mind. Like, man, I can only imagine if you got a parent that is also your educator in the same school, because you become a target. I know parents in general can become targets for speaking out, let alone being the educator speaking out, let alone having both roles in the same space. So I'm so glad that you talked about how parents can create that conversation, letting their child know, hey, you can tell me if I'm kind of doing the most and, or, how you want me to navigate this. But knowing that you also taught teach the AP Lit courses, and hearing what's going on in the nation right now. We know in Florida and countless other states, and even throughout the nation, ban books. Just Florida in particular, banning African American studies as an AP course, like, that's really a strong statement against a particular community.
Absolutely, yes.
How, what is your take on, what would you suggest for even an educator who maybe is in that space, like, I want to stand up or I want to speak out? What would you say as an educator to another educator?
So the first thing that I did, and even from the beginning of my teaching career, is I listened. I really think it's important to listen to the concerns of the students. Even though I was bothered by the prom theme, I probably would not have said anything if all the kids were fine. But to see, initially, it was one young woman who came to me in tears, just devastated. And that's one of many. Like, throughout my teaching career, having kids come to me and say, Miss, I have this problem. I don't know what to do, whether it's about race or their grades or their home life or whatever that is, just being a space to listen and to offer up. Like, I tell my students on the first day, nobody cares what you know, because they don't. We can Google. You want to know how to change a tire? Google it. You want to know who wrote Wuthering Heights? Google it. What they care about is how you can think, what you do with what you know, and how you apply that and how you think. So in my classroom, I do a lot of inquiry based. I do a lot of differentiated education. I really want students to think about the world in which we live. And I believe firmly that if you cannot read critically what you read, you will never think critically about the world in which you live. And so I open the door to conversations through our reading. We can talk about plot, and we can talk about structure, and we can talk about all of those things, which is so important. But also, let's take it off the page. I teach in Brighton, Colorado, and so many of these kids, they're not going to travel the world. A lot of them are never going to leave Colorado, but the best way to leave Colorado and leave Brighton High School is to read about places outside of Brighton High School and to learn about the experience of others. And that encourages empathy. And that encourages the ability to want to explore, and whether or not you have the finances to explore the world or just the finances to go to the library and check out books. Just being able to read and be open. And then also in a classroom to be open to those discussions. I had a very, very powerful history teacher, two very powerful history teachers as a kid. And one time I remember we were discussing World War II, and we were all struggling with the bombing of Hiroshima. We were all struggling with it. And he was teaching it exactly as he's supposed to do. And we kept asking questions. And he said, you know what? Stop. Close your books. We're not taking notes. And I remember vividly, he sat on his desk and said, what do you want to know? And our questions weren't around the logistics of the bombing. Our questions were around why this moment. And he was so very vulnerable and honest. And I think looking back, like that was one of the moments where, even though I didn't vocalize it then, I wanted to be an engineer as a 16-year-old. I didn't vocalize it then. I look back, and that's one of the moments where I'm like, that's the kind of person I want to be. That's the kind of teacher I want to be, who I'm not afraid to stop the conversations in our classes, to stop the curriculum parts of our conversation and say, okay, let's have a conversation on why this hurts and why this matters and where we can move forward with that. So my advice is to listen and to respond accordingly. What do kids need? They'll tell you what you need. They will tell you what they need. You just have to be willing to listen and they have to know that you are doing that, because they'll come to you. They'll come to you and they'll ask the questions, and they'll share with you, and you'll be a safe person for them.
Wow, just so many gems. You're just dropping the gems today. Oh my gosh, I couldn't even type as fast as I wanted to. But, I definitely will be going back and sharing some of this advice, not only that you were giving towards educators who are faced with the realities, working with kids who are asking questions, right? And then, educator to educator, but also what you're trying to create in the space, in your classroom space, for kids to think critically and be open and ready to learn in this way, not for the straight from the books. I can appreciate that. And it's just,
and I also just want to add, like, I teach accelerated and AP kids now, but that's not been my whole career. I started teaching in the regular gen ed classrooms, and this was important to me then too. A lot of times people say, well, you teach a gifted population. And while that's true, I teach some gifted kids. I also teach kids who are just there to challenge themselves, but I've also taught kids who didn't want to be there. So
that's who was identified, right? Yeah. Like that's another conversation. Yeah. Let's not delve into that.
Right. Like, you have to, like, let's talk about the kids, and whether they want to be there or not, there's always a way to listen to them. And there's always a way to open that door for empathy.
And you already shared that you had such an impact at your campus. Kids who you weren't actually their teacher knew to come to you, and the likelihood that you could be a safe space and ally for them, or just to share their feelings, that is resonating with me a lot. And I would hope that people hear that as well. It's not just the label that is on the youth or the course title that they're taking. This can be in a conversation at lunchtime, that you're in a group and you're getting your lunch on and they can come by you. And so I really am taking from you that creating a welcoming environment, it starts within as an educator. It's really how you're bringing your full self, and how you can bring your full self because you're listening first. It's so weird. It's like you don't have to overcompensate, essentially. Just listen. Like, it's not
Listen.
what lesson plan you made necessarily. Thank you for being prepared, educators, but being prepared to listen
To listen.
and be responsive. I'm really hearing you on that. It's so amazing and refreshing. I haven't been in a physical classroom with primary, secondary youth in a long time, but I can tell you that philosophy goes through even the collegiate classroom as well, because that's who they were, and initially as learners, right? And so when you can create those spaces for the inquisitive minds, whether they're labeled as gifted or not, that's what's important, because everyone is going to have a question. They're looking at what's happening on the screen,
Mhm.
and then coming to school 8 hours a day. Their likelihood is they're going to want to know some things, and answer is that educators should be ready to navigate. Now, Colorado, we're fortunate that things have not been shut down in the same way other states are going after curriculum. However, there are some districts
There
that
are.
have actually shut down the education, the access to honest curriculum,
In books, just access to books. Yeah,
simply that,
been.
and the choice of curriculum they purchased, we'll say.
Yeah.
The We know the American birthright standards is pretty limiting, and a couple of districts have actually adopted it.
Yeah,
And so in Colorado,
that's
so even
scary.
though it is, and it may seem like, oh, Florida's over there, they all, like the water in weather, but no, those mentalities, people are coming from all over to Colorado, and some folks have been here and don't want their kids exposed to certain things. And if they see it that way, it seems like, yeah, okay, that's their choice, their rights, and all that. But when they actually learn how restrictive it is and targeted it
Yeah.
is, the removal of certain histories, the honesty of, you know, history, like
And the
you said,
silencing of voices. Like
the
it's the silence
silencing. I
of
love
voices.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like that
Right.
actually, but I
It's
appreciate that
scary.
phrase.
Yeah. It's so many voices are being silenced,
Yeah.
and that as we want to raise an educated populace, they have to hear all the voices. They have to be able to discern the voices
It's
and
kind
hear
of
the
like they
story.
don't want to, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you're looking at it, that's ultimately what they don't want, an
Mhm.
educated populace, because then there's challenges, and
Right.
then it's questioning, and then the,
Yeah,
workforce is
I
gone.
love the questioning. My own children, we taught them from a young age. There's no question that you can't ask mom and dad. Like
Wow.
we're open to it. And, it's age appropriate answers at sometimes when they were
Of
little.
course. Of
But I
course.
mean, even today, my boys are 20, 22, and 24, and the conversations that we have as a family are wonderful, and they're
Wow.
enlightening. We don't always agree. We don't need to agree, but they're not afraid to question, and they're not afraid to question anything.
Wow.
And I want my students to feel that way too. Like, you can ask questions, you can challenge me. I'm learning too. I'm continually learning and continually growing. And by all means, challenge me. Let's have a conversation about it.
Wow. I think that is very powerful for educators to share, but also as parents, that there is the onus on, as a parent, like creating spaces, because kids do bring that openness to the classroom or not. I
Yeah.
will wrap up and ask a question that we've been asking a lot of folks. I'm not entirely familiar with all of the resources at Brighton High School. However, Colorado is currently having a study for adequate funding, and
Mm.
there's two studies options that people can take the surveys for. I'll put them on the chat later, but I have a question for you: that
Mhm.
what does a fully funded school or district look like for you? Or if it's a school, like, what does that include? What could you envision that would include?
Um, a fully funded district school looks like for me where parents don't have to worry about their kids' fees for participating in an AP class, or even sports for that matter. Like, a fully funded education means that the parents don't have to worry. So sorry, honey, you can't take the science class. I can't afford the fee. Or, I'm so sorry, honey, you can't take this class because there you have to fundraise in order to be a participate, and we just don't have the time and the energy for you to fundraise for that particular thing. It means my students having books, like books that they can take home with them, and books that are not 20 years old, history books or science books. Or and we talk about literature, that literature is timeless, and that's so true. I mean, I can teach from a book that's 20 years old, except I'm missing out on so many amazing voices that came out in the last two, you know. So I would love, fully funded means all of my students, regardless of income, have access to information that is relevant and current, and can better their futures and help them to decide what they want to what they want to put in the world and what they want to do with their lives, without having to worry about, like, I can't take calculus because I can't afford the calculator. Yeah, that's what it looks like to me.
Those
Access for
darn TI, what is it? TI
yeah,
89s. Woo!
I know. Yes,
Those were killer back then
I
as
know,
like
and they,
$100.
no, and I
I
mean,
remember.
I'm blessed because I teach English, and so I can pull things. I can
Yeah.
pull modern poets, and we can talk about it. But I don't have the money for like the modern textbook that has everyone in it.
Yeah.
And I can supplement. I don't know how you supplement a calculator in calculus. So
Whew,
that
that's
it's
why they were
access,
created, to help
right? I
with
mean,
that
it's about access. A
functionality.
fully funded school, fully funded district looks to me like everyone has access, regardless of financial, social, economic, racial background,
You
and they
know,
can see
this,
themselves in everything, in the work that they're doing in class, in the
I
literature
love
that
it,
they
and I
read, in the
appreciate
science
you
that they
so
do.
much. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Those are words that'll be definitely captioned and be able to share. So,
Thank you.
thank you again for your time. I'm so glad CEA was able to highlight you.
I'm truly
Um,
honored, just humbled.
well, it's the work you're doing. You know, I mean, the commitment and just foresight into what kids need, and that changes what the environment, not only in the classroom but in your school, right? And you took it even further, so I really appreciate you, and can't wait to see you next week.
I know, Tuesday. I'm excited.
Yes, and thank you everyone for watching, and
Thank you for having me.
thank you. Take care.
You too. Have a good one.